Here comes some more. On the road to Lloyd's, Naya and Say munched on a breakfast of freshly picked forest berries as they watched a pair of people walk toward them from the east. They wore working garb and carried little more than their nervous expressions as they went by. "Hi," Naya said. They flinched as Naya smiled and waved. A second later, they broke and fled into a nearby field. "I bet you like scaring people," Say looked at Naya's berry-stained fingers. "I don't," Naya said defensively, "it's just a habit. People usually greet each other, don't they?" "Not really," Say said. "In most places I've been to, the locals tend to be suspicious of outsiders. The only other place I know of where people greet strangers on the road like that is the Draconic Kingdom. Everyone's nice there." Naya could only envy how well-traveled the bard was. Going to Rimian on holy days and being assigned to various patrols marked the extent of her travels before the war. Accompanying the delegation to Riestais and the Sorceress Kingdom was an experience undreamed of before it happened. "What's the Draconic Kingdom like?" Naya asked. "They were being invaded by beastmen when I was there with some others. One time, a beastman patrol found us while we were traveling in the countryside. It was the rainy season and it rained so hard in the Draconic Kingdom that you can barely see in front of your face. The patrol somehow knew we were there before I noticed them." Naya's eyes widened and she swallowed. There were a few different races of beastmen in the Abelian Hills and all of them were much stronger than humans. Most importantly, they ate humans. "What happened after that?" "We were stopped on the road and they spoke to us. They were worried that we would get sick in the rain and gave us directions to the closest town." "Huh? She's talking about the beastmen, right?" "I told you everyone was nice there," Say said. Naya cast a blank stare at the road ahead. "The beastmen here didn't do that. Did that mean the Draconic Kingdom was a nicer place than the Holy Kingdom?" A few minutes later, a man and a woman walked by. This time, they bolted when Naya looked at them. "Looks like another brother and sister," Say said. "I don't get why they're running," Naya said. "Because they don't want to die?" Say gave her a funny look. "Also, you're glaring at them without your mask." "I'm not glaring at them. Also, there's no guarantee that they'll die. Before Yaldabaoth's invasion, most people who went to the wall survived. 6 out of 10 was a perfectly respectable survival rate. More importantly, it wasn't fair that some people thought they could escape their duties while others accepted them with good grace." Another escapee came running their way around the same time that the walls of Lloyd's appeared on the horizon. This one, however, was accompanied by the sound of galloping hooves. 2 mounted armsmen appeared shortly after, shouting at the man to stop. "Would anyone stop in that situation?" Say muttered. "They should," Naya said. "If you give law enforcement officials trouble, it just gets you in deeper trouble." "Deeper trouble than being put on the wall?" Naya gave the bard a sour look. Ahead of them, the 2 armsmen were still trying to stop the runaway, wheeling their mounts this way and that as the man ran all over the place. Eventually, they got fed up with it and one of the armsmen jabbed the man in the stomach with the butt of his spear. The man crumpled to the ground with an empty wheeze. "So is it always like this when they send people to the army?" Say asked. "Of course not," Naya answered. "Serving in the Royal Army is something everyone has to do, so there isn't usually any fuss. People muster at the local town or city of their own accord when it's their turn to serve." "Then why are people acting like this?" "Because." Her thoughts went to her dinner-time discussion the previous evening. "It's because we just fought a war. Plus, the royal court suspended its policy of mandatory military service. Now, they're suddenly calling people into service. Even though everyone is being subjected equally to the ordinance, some people still think it isn't fair." In hindsight, suspending that policy had been a terrible idea. They had learned during the war, or at least she thought they did, that reinforcing the army wasn't as simple as calling up some reservists to make up for their mounting casualties. The first few weeks following the fall of the Great Wall had been a veritable meat grinder where hundreds of thousands of reservists were flung into the jaws of Yaldabaoth's demi-human army with nothing to show for it but well-fed enemies. Additionally, the dismal recruitment numbers for the Royal Army once service became voluntary had been a clear warning of what would occur should they try something like this. It was strange that the scions she was with immediately understood what would happen the moment they were made aware of the order, yet the royal court did not, or maybe they did and did it anyway because they didn't think they had a choice. By the time Naya and Say walked by, the runaway was getting his wrists bound. He had started screaming about unfairness and not wanting to go before that, so they gagged him first. The armsman seemed surprised that Naya and Say had closed the distance between them so quickly. "Is he a bad man?" Say asked, wide-eyed. "He's a miscreant who put himself above his fellow citizens," one of the armsmen nodded. "What happened?" Naya asked. The armsman's eyelid twitched as he met her gaze. "Where are you two from?" he asked. "A place northeast of Bast," Naya answered. It wasn't a lie. Lord Aston's place was a bit northeast of the town. The two armsmen traded looks. "It's nothing for you to worry about," the first one said. "Wow, they really are trying to keep it a secret from us. What are you doing all the way out here?" the second armsman asked. "We picked some mushrooms after it rained." Say shifted the covered basket slung over her shoulders with an excited voice. "Someone said we could get something nice if we sold them in the city." Naya offered her own basket up for inspection, but the armsman only took a look at Say's before smiling at the bard. "You two should go on ahead and do just that, little miss. I'm sure the boys in the camp will appreciate some variety for dinner." The two armsmen waved at Say and they went on their way. Naya wrestled with the complicated feelings welling up within her as they resumed their journey to the city's western gate. "I told you it would work," Say said. But I don't like this. It feels horrible." She wouldn't say that she was hungry for attention, but becoming effectively non-existent wasn't in any way desirable. It was supposed to be the springtime of her youth, but it felt like winter had already come for her. Roughly 2 kilometers outside of the city gate, they came across the familiar sight of one of the royalist work camps. A set of men at a makeshift checkpoint stopped them on the road, and Naya tensed as they approached. "Morning," an officious-looking fellow came forward with a clipboard. "Where are you from?" "A clearance northeast of Bast, sir," Naya replied. "A clearance, huh?" It was supposedly a safe answer, according to Say. Naming a village might lead to probing questions about that village or its residents to discern the truth of their claim. A clearance, on the other hand, was just a nameless new place created by the frenzy of the industrial activity characteristic of the Reconstruction period. Much like the labor camps, well, they were labor camps, they were all unofficial, none of them had names, and anyone from anywhere could end up in one. "What brings you to the city?" Say unshouldered her basket, looking up at the customs officer with her big blue eyes as she held it up in front of her. "My sister said that someone said that we can get something nice for these." The sentries gave Naya suspicious looks before one of them gingerly lifted the cover of Say's basket. Naya glowered at them, wondering what they were expecting and why it was somehow her fault. "Let's see, mushrooms?" "Yup." Say beamed. "I see," the customs officer said as the sentries visibly relaxed. "I've no doubt you'll be able to sell them, but I recommend that you do so in the camp up ahead." "Why?" "It's just better." "Why?" "Because we charge a toll for goods going into the city." "Why?" "To make sure the roads are safe, well maintained, and that everyone that works to keep things in good order is paid." "Okay." Say's eyes went from the officer to Naya. Naya nodded and ushered Say along. "That's the meanest-looking sister I've ever seen," one of the sentries said after they left. "It's no wonder they dumped her in the woods," another sentry said. Naya sniffed, doing her best not to flee in the face of their harsh laughter. "Are you going to cry?" Say asked. No," Naya wiped her eyes. "Where are we going now?" "The work camp. I don't want to get all the money for our mushrooms taxed away." "How is that even legal?" "It's because the royalists are the acting lords here. That means they have the right to charge tolls for the roads that go through their lands." "I don't think I've seen this happen in any other country," Say said. "I mean, tolls are charged for roads that the local lords are maintaining, but this is crazy. Why doesn't someone do something about it?" "Because the Holy King doesn't want to do anything about it." Infuriatingly, King Caspond was blind to what was going on in his kingdom. The last time he had made a public appearance was during his ascension. If it wasn't for the intermittent meetings of the royal court, one would think he didn't exist at all. By all reports, he was actually pleased with the progress that the Holy Kingdom was making and encouraging more of the same. They quieted down as they approached the entrance of the labor camp, which was marked with the banners of the presiding house. Naya looked up at the unfamiliar heraldry, which was dominated by a woven circle of vines and flowers, then stepped closer to Say. "Which house is this?" she whispered. "House Orta. The second son, Ilano, is in charge." "He already sounds like an asshole," Naya muttered. Anyone who could stoop to the measures she had seen so far had to be an absolute jerk. Then joined the traffic in the narrow lane between the rows of white tents. It had the vague feel of an army camp, though it was closer to the ones during the war where civilians were mixed in with the soldiery. The lane eventually led to a circular clearing that Naya supposed acted as the camp's market plaza. Long tables were set up under a canopy of colorful tents where an array of goods and services that one might find in a town were on offer. Naya frowned as she examined both the vendors and their customers. The goods were normal enough, but the transactions were being conducted with unfamiliar metal coins. She was still trying to figure out what they were when Say stopped at a cooking area on one side of the clearing. The bard placed her basket on a cleared counter and Naya followed suit. It wasn't long until a skinny fellow dressed as a cook came to speak to them. "Good morning," he said. "What do you have for us?" "Mushrooms." Say grinned. The cook dragged one of the baskets toward him and flipped back the cloth cover. He picked up several, taking a good whiff of each before calling over an older cook. "What do you think?" he asked. After going through the same inspection, the older cook looked over the counter at them. "These aren't field mushrooms. Where did you find these?" "In the forest northwest of here," Naya replied. "The forest?" The cook frowned for a moment. "They're pretty fresh." They probably were, considering that they had picked them outside of Lord Aston's manor before running over to Lloyd's. She knew she had gotten stronger over the course of the war, but it still shocked her that they could cover what was normally a day's travel in 3 hours. Maybe it was Say's spell song that did most of the work. The older chef wiped a hand on his apron before producing a coin purse. He counted out 24 of the strange copper coins and pushed them forward. "If you gather more," he said, "we'll be happy to take them off your hands." "What are these?" Naya eyed the coins. "They don't look like money." "House Orta scrip. Each chit is worth a full meal at this kitchen. You can use them at the other vendors too, of course. This is barely enough to get by." If they ate 3 meals a day, traveling back and forth from Lloyd's would eat half of the chits. One normally spent a full day foraging, leaving 6 chits to cover all their expenses outside of food. Still, the scrip had an advantage over regular coinage due to the fact that it was worth exactly 1 meal, no matter what happened. She could see how it might be considered an attractive alternative considering the insane prices in Hobans. "No, that's wrong. The royalist houses are peddling this scrip as a solution to the problems that they created in the first place. I bet they get something out of doing this, too." They thanked the cook for his business and went to wander around the rest of the market. Naya quietly watched Say as she stopped to chat with a vendor selling clay pots. "Are you from House Orta?" the bard asked. "All of the merchants here work for him," the shopkeeper replied. "I'm from a village on the Orta Delta." "How come everyone doesn't just work in the city?" "Because the locals are keeping us out. The guilds in Lloyd's are adamant about defending their position and refuse to let us do business. But we're here to help rebuild the place no matter what they say, so the young lord established this camp. Bet those pricks in the city regret being so stubborn now." From the outside, Lloyd's didn't look like it needed to be rebuilt anymore, so Naya wondered what he was talking about. There was a lot of damage caused by the invasion, plus its siege and recapture by the Holy Kingdom's forces, so maybe there was plenty of work to be done inside the walls. "We're from the country," Say said, "so we don't know much about the city. Why can't they share?" "I think everyone here's asked the same thing at some point," the shopkeeper shrugged. "My guess is that they're being greedy. All those people with their fancy workshops are trying to keep us from feeding ourselves. The young lord said that there's more than enough work for everyone, but the shops in Lloyd's want all of it. We came from the south to help out, and this is how they act toward us." "They sound like a bunch of meanies," Say said with a worried frown. "I couldn't have said it better myself," the man nodded. The next 3 shopkeepers Say spoke with shared a similar tale, leaving Naya to wonder if there was actually something to what they said. It was true that there was still a lot of work left to be done in the north and that they couldn't do it without the south's help. The persistent labor camps that the royalists established may have been initially caused by some other conflict that simply escalated until the system that they now saw in front of them manifested. Duke de Bonai told her that there were 3 social groups in the Holy Kingdom. There was the Crown, which included the temples since they always stood behind the Holy King, the aristocracy, and the rural common folk. However, that was just how the aristocracy saw it. To Naya and other urbanites, the societal divisions were different. There was the crown, and under the crown were its four supporting pillars, the temples, the military, the Besseres dynasty, which normally included the ducal houses, and the cities, which were a part of the Holy King's domain. On the other side were the rural aristocrats, colloquially known as the nobility, and the rural common folk who lived in their lands. While that didn't sound like much, rural subjects actually made up close to 90% of Roblay's total population. In short, the normal state of the Holy Kingdom of Roblay was a perpetual power struggle between the urban and rural populations while getting nibbled by demi-humans on the side. Given that humans were humans, Naya suspected that most human kingdoms and empires experienced the same problems. Say's accounts of the empire seemed to indicate just that. The way the royalists did things may have resulted from some incident or behavior inherent to that struggle. She couldn't blindly assume that it was out of a desire to sate some comical sense of greed as many might assume, as the general behavior of the royalists outside of a few isolated incidents was still in line with the orderly nature of the Holy Kingdom. Before they left the camp to enter Lloyd's, Say used their scrip to purchase a bag of flour. She had it split between two sacks so they could each carry half in their baskets. The shopkeeper of the mill handed them a carved wooden token after that. "What's this for?" Naya asked. "Proof of purchase," he answered. "Hold on to it if you plan on looking around the city before going home so they don't tax you for your flour. The sentries at the checkpoint will take it back on your way out." "That makes sense. Thanks." The scrip was practically useless outside of the labor camp, so she was wondering how outsiders made use of it. When they approached the city gate, Naya was reminded of their current situation as an armsman tackled a civilian who broke through a cordon of wooden barriers. The two men struggled on the road in front of her until two other armsmen jogged over to help hold the civilian down. "Is there a war in there?" Say asked. The first almsman, who was pinning the runner with his knee, looked up at Say with a bemused look. "No, young miss," he said, "just a bunch of honorless cowards. Your big sister can probably scare 'em off with a look. Hold on a bit while we deal with this fella." After having his wrists bound, the man still refused to cooperate, so he was dragged back into the gate kicking and screaming. When one of the barriers was opened to let him through, a whole group of men and women came out of nowhere and rushed the gate. They threw themselves bodily at the sentries, knocking them over in their mad scramble. "We need help down here. Free them." "Ow! What this bitch bit me." Naya and Say stepped to the side of the road as chaos mounted in front of the gate. Roughly 2/3 of the runaways got past the cordon and fled into the countryside, avoiding the road and its checkpoint. She watched as those who were left behind were subdued by the armsmen coming down from the wall through the gatehouse. What has the Holy Kingdom become? Not 3 months before, they were fighting shoulder to shoulder to liberate their home. Now, it looked like it was everyone for themselves. "What will happen to all the people who are caught?" Say asked. "Do they get punished?" "They have to serve in the army," Naya said, "so doing something on top of that would be counterproductive." "Doesn't that mean they have nothing to lose by trying to run?" "They should be proud to serve," Naya replied. "Every country needs an army to protect it, and the way we choose people is impartial. That guy from before said it. Those who try to escape conscription are people who think their lives are worth more than those of their fellow citizens." It wasn't as if they were being sent to some far-flung place that the Holy Kingdom had no business being in. Military service was always essential for their country's survival. Like I said, the man who initially spoke to them said, "Honorless cowards. Come on, let's get you in the city before another group of vermin tries to escape." The man guided them past the group being bound and through the opening in the cordon. Beyond, a small crowd of spectators curiously watched the scene. "Do you have people trying to run everywhere?" Naya asked. "Nah," the armsman said. "The folks out in the country understand their obligations and why they exist. It's these wretches in the cities and towns that cause all of the problems. They're like animals that only think of themselves. Oh, before I forget, let's take a look at your tokens." Once the man verified their wooden tokens, he bid them a good day and returned to the gate. Naya hesitated for several seconds before walking further into the city, fearing what sort of conflicts awaited within. To her surprise, however, things were generally orderly and the citizens seemed to be going about their daily business as usual. "What are you buying me, big sis?" Say asked. Naya examined the storefronts as they walked by. "Let's see, wait, why am I buying you stuff? Isn't that what big sisters should do?" But she reached inside her skirt pocket for her coin purse. Infuriatingly, she still somehow only had the remains of her parents' allowance. Los Ganaderos, like most rural inhabitants, used a system of credit, and debts were settled at the same time that goods were delivered and pay distributed. She wouldn't be paid for her work until the herds were delivered, which would be in a year or so. On second thought, Say said as she eyed the contents of Naya's purse, "Maybe I should pay for everything. Somehow, that makes it even worse." "Don't worry, big sis," Say patted her on the back, "I'll take care of you until you get your life straightened out. Actually, here." Say dug into her pocket and pulled out a fistful of coins, dropping them into Naya's purse. Naya gaped silently at the gold trade coins as she counted. 3, 5, 6, 8, 11. "It'll look better if you pay for your own stuff," Say told her. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" "I'm just trying to help." Naya frowned at Say's innocent expression. The bar just loved to tease her in all sorts of twisted ways. Foot traffic stalled as the wagons ahead of them took turns going around a giant hole in the road. As the armsman at the gate asserted, there was still plenty of work to be had. Plenty of damage from the war remained unrepaired in favor of fixing more critical issues. Before long, they arrived at the city harbor, where Naya figured she could get a decent read on how Lloyd's was doing. Several ranks of men were under guard at the base of one of the piers, which she assumed were conscripts awaiting transport. The rest of the wharf was decently busy, with lumber aplenty marked for the south. They separated themselves from the traffic, walking over to the waterfront. Naya leaned on a wooden railing as she scanned the bay for ships. "Life seems normal enough here." Just as she said that, a man ran by them and jumped over the rail, landing in the water with a loud splash. Two armsmen jogged over and watched the man swim away. One of them clicked his tongue. "Does he really think he can get away like that?" "I don't think he's thinking at all," the other armsman said. The two walked off, shadowing the swimmer from the shore. Out in the water, a rowboat came up behind the escapee. One of the armsmen in the boat reached out and grabbed the man by his collar, pulling him aboard when he finally exhausted himself. Naya and Say watched as he was delivered to the ranks awaiting transport to the wall, his wet and miserable countenance the only reward for his troubles. Though Lloyd's was one of the smallest cities in the Holy Kingdom, its current population was around 10,000 excluding the new labor camps. It was still a city, and Naya struggled to figure out what was going on and who to speak with. Everyone had their own interpretation of what was happening and why, though the general themes that came with the divide between urban and rural society seemed to weigh heavily on anything anyone said. Even now, as she and Say settled down for a late lunch in the city's main plaza, they listened to another bout of familiar complaints by a group of citizens. "It's wrong, I tell ya," a man in a work apron motioned angrily with a hand. "They say we don't need the army anymore, and now suddenly they're yanking people for the wall. Makes no sense at all," another man shook his head. Heads around the small gathering nodded in agreement. "My son was getting ready to take over the workshop," a third man said. "We thought the days of fighting were behind us. He's got a kid on the way, too." "At least you have a workshop," a laborer snorted. "I've been scratching up a living doing odd jobs for years, and they still call spares like us to fight. Then, we're reservists for the army. We're spares for our families and spares for the army." Putting it that way, it did feel pretty mean. While Naya wasn't exactly a spare, she had no titles or tenancies to inherit from her family. Unless one was a talented genius, the only options for people like her were joining the royal army, the temples, or scraping up a meager existence in the cities. Of course, there was also becoming a housewife, but men didn't have that choice. Naya glanced around as the gathering grew more noisome and passers-by stopped to lend an ear. The nearby armsmen were quick to take note of the knot in the crowd, however. They pushed their way through towards the group, their halberds gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Clear out," one of them shouted over the din, "you're obstructing traffic." The men and women dispersed. Naya finished off her skewer of fish before rejoining the flow of the street with Say. "Maybe we should have waited for Miss tomorrow," Naya said. "Trying to make sense of all this is." "That's just how gathering information works," Say said. Do you think neatly organized little bundles of information just conveniently appear to present themselves to you for no reason? Obviously not, but... A blonde-haired young priest dressed in high-ranking vestments came up the street, accompanied by 2 female attendants in the garb of temple staff. Isn't that? Their eyes met, and they stared at one another as they drew closer. As the priest walked by, Naya's hand shot out to grab him by the arm. Don't ignore me like that, Naya cried. I'm already questioning my existence as it is. Wouldn't people normally keep their distance when someone looks at them like that? The priest replied stuffily. You know who I am. Naya gave the priest's arm a shake. Should we do something about him? Say asked. Naya's gaze slid over to the bard. Do something? No, Priest Jan is a friend of mine. He joined the Northern Resistance forces not long after the invasion started and was part of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps. Priest Jan, this is Say. She's a traveling bard. May the gods bless you this fine afternoon, Priest Jan smiled. Shall we take our discussion to a more suitable setting? Priest Jan sent a pointed look at the busy street around them. More than a few people had stopped to watch, perhaps wondering if another conscription-related scuffle had broken out. Naya nodded and they turned to join the priest and his attendants as they casually strolled along. So, have you found yourself a husband yet? Me? No. That's no good, Priest Jan said. We lost so many during the war. Well, I suppose competition might be stiff for the exact same reason. Naya nodded. Although both men and women served in the Royal Army, the majority of the Holy Kingdom's women didn't pursue a career in the military. As a result, a good chunk of the men in the Holy Kingdom had been killed as part of the Royal Army at the outset of the war. Additionally, men still stepped up to protect women and children as the conflict raged on. While this technically meant that the population could recover more quickly, finding a husband had become a daunting affair for post-war women. What about you? Naya asked. Oh, I got married right after the war ended, Priest Jan smiled. Ah, you did say something along those lines, now that I think about it. Naya was attending to His Majesty the Sorcerer King at the time while he was visiting the court during the Siege of Lloyds, and the Sorcerer King questioned the wisdom of making such a declaration before a major battle. To this day, she still couldn't figure out what the problem was. She thought it was nice and romantic. Was it that acolyte who was always with you back then? Naya asked. That's right, Priest Jan answered with a nod. Paula's already expecting. I also married Maria and Martha here. She coughed as her congratulations lodged in her throat. I thought they were your attendants. They are, but you know how it is. Life in the ministry is always busy and it's 10 times worse nowadays. There's little time to pursue a relationship and it's hardly fair for a man to be monopolized by a single woman in our current circumstances. You could say that we're all doing our part. Doing your part, huh? Maria and Martha both smiled serenely as he spoke. Naya's mind went somewhere stupid and she remained silent until they arrived at the cathedral in Lloyd's main plaza. As with most of the buildings in the city, the cathedral had seen better days. The debris left in the wake of the demi-human occupation had been cleared away, but restoration efforts lagged behind. Wooden scaffolding covered the walls and tarps had been stretched over the holes in the structure. The cathedral's interior was in a similar state of disrepair. Hastily crafted pews had replaced the old, broken ones, but they had to be arranged around the holes in the stone floor. Naya looked up at the once majestic murals on the ceiling, which were no longer illuminated by the building's broken stained glass windows. It took weeks to clear out the terrapus nests, Priest Jan said. I swear the stench still lingers no matter how many clean spells we use. Naya wrinkled her nose at the memory. Lloyd's Cathedral was the tallest building in the city, so hundreds of terrapus had nested there. The entire place had been covered in layers of guano and there were thousands of slimes everywhere. How did you manage to clean up the disaster? Naya asked. It took a little while, the priest answered, but the solution was rather simple in the end. We just left the building alone and let the slimes get rid of the mess. Sentries were stationed around the perimeter and they dispatched the slimes that tried to wander off. That's pretty clever. After the battle for the city, which included the Sorcerer King's duel with the Grand King of Destruction, Bissa, the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army had camped in and around Lloyd's. The tiny city could in no way handle the sanitary needs of the army and its camp followers, so an outbreak of slimes and other monsters that fed on waste occurred. The slimes literally erupted from the city's sewer system one day and attacked everyone and everything in their hunger, so the first thing that people would think at the time was to kill them, not use them. They walked around to the cloister behind the cathedral, where they found Paula toiling away in the gardens. The acolyte rose to greet them with a smile. "Welcome back, Bishop." "Bishop?" Naya frowned. "A side effect of nearly everyone else dying, I suppose," the bishop said. "But that means you're the prefect." "Such that it is," the prefect shrugged. "The crown assigned nobles to the Praecarii with the blessing of the temples, and we're bare on staff anyway, so I basically function as a senior priest these days." "What's Praecarii?" Say asked. "Temple land leased out to tenants," Bishop Jan said. "They were ruined like everything else, however. Even the monasteries were razed. I haven't had a taste of good mead since before the war." The bishop sighed as if that was the worst part of it, but it shouldn't have been his primary concern. The main revenues of the temples of the four in the Holy Kingdom came from the Praecarii. Since they were so short-staffed and most of their institutional activities had been suspended in the wake of the war, however, they could probably sustain their core functions through temple services alone. Bishop Jan led them into a sparsely furnished office that looked like it had been burnt out. "So," he said as he took a seat at his desk, "what brings you from Hobans? Given you're in a dress, I can't imagine you're here on Holy Order business. Could it be that you came husband hunting? If so, I'm afraid to say that Lloyd's is in the same situation as everywhere else in the north, according to the reports." "Something was bothering me," Naya replied. "Since the Royalists took control of Lloyd's a few weeks ago, I wanted to see how things had changed." "That's a very broad line of inquiry. Any information that you have will help. This is really important." The bishop rested his elbows on his desk, steepling his fingers with an expressionless look. Maria appeared with a stack of wooden cups and placed them on a nearby table. Martha came in on her heels, filling them with hot water from a bronze kettle. "I know that the new Royalists are made up of the progressives from past days," Bishop Jan said, "but the shift in methodology between them and the old Royalists is so radical that I'm not sure what to think. Hobans has ordered us to cooperate, however, so there's little that I can do about it." "Does that mean you feel something's wrong with how the Royalists are running things?" "That's yet to be seen. They have an explanation for everything and claim that Hobans is the same way, so we just have to wait and see." "Why you can't do that?" The bishop leaned back from Naya's outburst, exchanging a look with his wives. "Why is that?" "Have you been to the capital?" Naya asked. "No," Bishop Jan scoffed. "We've been so busy in Lloyd's that we couldn't even attend the victory celebrations. But the reports indicate that Hobans is doing remarkably well." "May I please take a look at one of these reports?" "Just a moment." Bishop Jan rose from his seat, but Paula beat him to the cabinets along one wall of the office. She opened one and ran a finger through the documents within. "Which ones would you like, Your Excellency?" she asked. "The monthly summaries for Lloyd's Prefecture and Hobans, please." Paula took a moment to locate the desired files. The bishop gestured with an open hand after she set them on the table. "There are only 3 full months' worth of reports, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to find what you're looking for." Naya placed the reports for Lloyd's and Hobans side by side, looking back and forth as she compared them. She wasn't an expert in administrative matters, but the files were presented in such a way that most people could make sense of their content. "This doesn't make sense," she frowned. "I know that members of the Holy Order spend half the day bashing one another over the head," Bishop Jan said, "but it's not that complicated." "That's not what I meant." Naya kept comparing the lines of each report. "Why are the numbers for Hobans so huge compared to Lloyd's under the Conservatives?" "Hobans is the capital," the bishop replied matter-of-factly. "It would be strange if it was the same as Lloyd's. The new administrators promised that we would see the same results in a few months, relatively speaking." She struggled to reconcile the numbers in the reports with what she witnessed in Hobans. "This is a lie." "It has to be." While the summary only referenced records that weren't included in the report, it did break things down into several categories such as reconstruction costs, trade, tax revenues, government expenditures, population growth, and so on. All of it painted an exquisitely optimistic picture of the capital region's recovery, one that she had seen no sign of while she lived there. Government expenditures were slashed by 3/4. Trade and tax revenues were 30 times that of Lloyd's, despite Hobans only having roughly 6 times the population. Naya pointed to the ridiculous figures, looking up at the bishop. "You have to have been suspicious of these claims," she said. "They're entirely unrealistic." "I did express my confusion over those numbers," Bishop Jan replied, "but the nobles had a plausible explanation for it." "And what was that?" "According to them, a significant amount of our country's productivity goes unreported. One of the first things that they did was take measures to ascertain the true economic situation of their assigned territories. Revenues went up accordingly once the nobles enforced transparent reporting." "Transparent reporting?" "They make it sound as if the Holy Kingdom is swarming with smugglers and shady organizations." The bishop chuckled lightly at her comment. "I was a bit offended when I first heard it, as well, but they came up with proof within a week. According to their findings, roughly 2/3 of Lloyd's economy was what they termed informal. 1/4 of that informal economy's transactions could be considered criminal." "What would be an example of a transaction in this informal economy?" "The majority of them were supply or service arrangements. For instance, a weaver agreeing to mend a fisherman's net for a certain number of fish in return. Labor for room and board is also a prevalent one." Naya had to admit those things did happen all the time before the war. No one thought badly of those activities, however. "But that's normal stuff," Say said. "Why is it suddenly wrong?" "Because it obscures the true productive potential of the Holy Kingdom," the bishop said. "Missing revenues aside, they claim that having a clearer picture of the economy helps them plan better for the future, and I can see the sense in that." "Did they do the same thing in Hobans?" Naya was away on patrol most of the time, so all she could do was note how things had changed whenever she returned from the countryside. "What did they propose to fix the problem?" she asked. "They're pushing heavily for full monetization," the bishop answered. "All goods, services, and labor are recognized as having monetary value and must be reported. That even includes what goes on between members of a workshop or family business, though I have no idea how they'd enforce that." "I don't think they intend to," Naya said. "That's what those labor camps are for." "Is that so?" She frowned down at the most recent pair of reports. Based on the bishop's explanations, the report for Lloyd's was what a normal recovery would look like. Because the labor camps around the city were just starting to get established, it was very easy to see how they worked. "The nobles don't trust the city folk," Naya said. "Those labor camps contain almost every industry that you can find in a town or city, and they're intercepting goods flowing in from the prefecture. No one needs to look inside houses or whatever for accurate reporting because, eventually, the workshops in the city will have nothing to report. By controlling the city's economy, they'll get the numbers that they're looking for." "But they said that Lloyd's would be doing as well as Hobans once everything." Naya shot to her feet and slammed her palms on the desk. "The citizens of Hobans can barely afford to eat," she cried. "You don't want to be doing as well as Hobans." "But, the numbers. Those numbers are an illusion. I'd almost call them a lie. The price of everything just keeps getting higher and higher in Hobans and no one has any money anymore. Even the royalists know it. All those labor camps outside of the city walls don't run on coin, they run on food-based scrip. Those things that the nobles talked to you about aren't some special product of their management, they're things that have always existed no matter who was in charge and how they framed things." She wondered if Bishop Jan's reaction was related to why the problem was getting worse and worse. The people who had the power to do anything about it either only saw nice numbers on a page or were taking advantage of that same blindness. "No, that's not right. The conservatives refused to do the same thing and they're doing fine." Did it mean that the proverbial lines were already drawn? That everyone in power east of Hobans willfully partook of the horrible new form of management spearheaded by the royalists? She didn't want to believe it was the case. "If you don't believe me," Naya told the bishop, "visit Hobans yourself. I hope you have plenty of money, though, they've monetized everything there." "Perhaps I will. Is this the true reason why you came dressed as you are? To covertly deliver a warning?" "I'd be happy if you could do something about it," Naya said. "Hopefully before angry mobs start burning bakeries and people get assassinated for being on the wrong side. The last few months have been far more depressing than I'd like to admit." "Assassinated? Didn't you hear?" Naya said. "Iago Lauser, the new black, is dead. The royalists didn't like that he was importing supplies from Lloyd's when it was under the conservatives. They hired an assassin to kill him and almost all of his hacienda's senior management, as well as lighting the camps around it on fire. Naya left the cathedral on that note, letting out a tired sigh as she rejoined the traffic flowing through the square. Things were still lively, at least compared to Hobon's, but it only seemed like a matter of time before Lloyd's had the life sucked out of it, just like the capital. "I didn't know you could be so dramatic, big sis," Say said. "It just came out." Naya mentally curled up on herself. "Everyone's just so nonchalant about the problem. That's probably the worst part about it. You just arrive in a terrible place and you never realized that things were heading there the entire time. Worse yet, many people were gleefully accelerating the process by participating in the system of rewards and honors for exceptional performance. That in itself wasn't the problem, however. Remune had plenty of examples of those incentives working properly. "We still have plenty of time until it gets late," Say said. "What do you want to do now?" She already understood that problems were taking root, but, even if she did, she had no clue how to stop them. "Figuring out where the problems would start might give us some clues about how to counter them," Naya said. "Have any ideas? Someone once told me that following the money would usually lead somewhere interesting." "I don't even know what that's supposed to mean." Naya wasn't sure that she wanted to know at all, as it sounded like another ludicrous anecdote from a bard who always saw the worst things in life. "In this case," Say said, "the nobles are being pretty blatant about it, aren't they? They know that their scheme works, so all they have to do is enact it." "Their scheme, huh? They're in the process of setting up the labor camps and regulating the city's resources through them, so." "Let's go back to the docks," Naya said. "It's the only place they can't block with their labor camps." "All right. By the way, you said that the bishop was a member of the Corps? I thought the temples hated the undead." "It's not as if the Corps was filled with undead," Naya frowned. "I know it's true that the temple's official stance calls for the destruction of the undead, but there were plenty of priests and paladins who could work with the Sorcerer King. Queen Kalka herself would have probably gotten along with him. Both she and His Majesty wished for their citizens to be harmonious and happy. It was a shame that the Holy Queen never got the chance to meet the Sorcerer King. The Holy Kingdom would have probably been a very different place than it was today if she had." A front of angry grey clouds loomed on the horizon when they arrived at their destination. "I'm not very superstitious, but I don't like the looks of that." "Looks like a convenient excuse to me," Say replied. "Huh?" Naya's gaze went from the clouds to the bard, then back again. The corner of her eyelid twitched as a sheet of lightning illuminated the coming storm. "No, they couldn't, could they? No, they will." She stepped on a rail and twisted around to scan the waterfront. The entire wharf was a hubbub of activity as it prepared to receive the ships coming in ahead of the storm. "Ugh, there are too many people." At first, she thought she would be able to spot groups of armsmen harassing the people working on the docks, but she couldn't make anything out in the chaos. Merchants made last-minute sales before packing up their stalls and carting them away while wagons were rolled into place to rush whatever cargo came into the nearby warehouses. A gust of wind pushed Naya off of her perch. They moved away as a large wave crashed into the wharf, inundating the stones. "I don't think we'll be able to catch them before it happens," Naya sighed. "They won't be doing it right in plain view," Say said. "Let's check the alleys." Naya rushed to catch up to Say as she went for the closest alley. There were too many buildings to check, but they had to try. Hobon's, Kalinsha, and Prat were all landlocked, allowing the royalists to gain economic control of them fairly easily. Lloyd's, on the other hand, could import vast quantities of cargo by ship. The royalists' tactic of using labor camps on their assigned fiefs outside of the city couldn't work as they had no jurisdiction over the water. To achieve their ends on Crown land, an accident had to be arranged. Before, it was an angry mob burning down a town mill and bakery. The royalists hadn't driven the people of Lloyd's to the state where they could manipulate public anger yet, so the coming storm was a golden opportunity to expedite their plans. Any warehouses or processing facilities unwilling to go along with their schemes would be mysteriously set on fire by lighting. The rain would make it easy to control the aftermath, as well. A peal of thunder drove Naya forward as she searched for any would-be arsonists. The 2 blocks closest to the piers were occupied by warehouses and industries meant to support the fishing industry. That meant there was only one alley to go down. Hopefully, they had chosen to go in the right direction. she nearly ran into Say as the bar jerked to a stop. Naya looked to her left and right, then nearly shouted as she spotted a pair of men between a warehouse and a covered shipyard for small vessels. Both were garbed as common laborers. One of them knelt, his hands working on something out of view as the other man held up a lamp to provide him with light. They both froze and looked in her direction as she approached. Hi, she smiled nervously. Naya wasn't sure what to say, so something stupid came out. The two men gave her incredulous looks. We're not buying, woman. Buying? Get lost. You were so rude. And what do they mean by buying? Were they accustomed to performing shady dealings in dark alleys? Naya swallowed. It was rather roguelike. The men obviously weren't commoners, either. They had the height and solid look of professional armsmen. You deaf. The man with the lamp stepped toward her. Leave. Why should I? What are you two doing here, anyway? She glanced at the wall where the kneeling man was, but he had moved to block her line of sight on whatever he was doing. They didn't miss her look. That's none of your business, the man with the lamp said. Go home. Didn't you see that storm coming in? I did, Naya replied. But nothing says I can't be here. Naya looked past the man's shoulder to the street beyond. People were running back and forth as they rushed for shelter. None of them spared a glance at what was going on in the alley. A flash of lightning scattered the darkness. The kneeling man jumped at the thunderclap that followed. What's that you have there? Naya pointed at some rags piled against the wall. Like I said, it's none of your business. Your friend looks like he's scared of thunder. Maybe you should take him home before it gets worse. An exasperated sigh joined the sound of the rising wind. We're staying right where we are, the man with the lamp told her. You're the one who should leave. I don't want to, Naya replied. I like it here. Another clap of thunder shook the buildings around them. Your friend is going to cry, Naya said. I'm not. The kneeling scrubbed his cheeks. Eh? Is he actually crying? Don't you feel sorry for him? Take him home already. I'm not crying. Yeah? Then why are the rags all wet? It's not from me. It's from the oil that... The man's mouth snapped shut. Naya's eyes went back and forth between the two laborers. What did you say about oil? It's nothing, the man with the lamp told her. Didn't your parents ever tell you not to stick your nose in other people's business? My mother always told me to help people who were troubled, Naya replied. Do you need money? I'll give you some for that lamp. Huh? What am I doing? They were trying to set the building on fire, but they weren't doing it yet, so she had no right to stop them. She couldn't just run in and attack the guy while shouting wild accusations. Not that the royalists would believe anything I said. Wait, aren't I screwed here? A drizzle made its way between the rooftops. Naya moved under the eaves as it rapidly turned into a deluge. Then, she leaned over and snatched the oil-soaked rags. Hey. What? I wanted to wipe myself off. They're just rags, right? They're my rags. She held up the cloth in her hand. There were at least 2 moth-eaten socks in the bundle. You don't want these, Naya said. Just get some new socks. I can buy you some socks if you'd like. It'd be nice if Say did something to help, huh? Where did she go? Naya couldn't take her eyes off of the men, but she couldn't feel the bard's presence nearby anymore. A lump formed in her throat. Was she alone in an alley with 2 rogues? The second man rose to his feet. Naya took a step back. What are you doing? She asked. Stay away. Help. Someone. Damn it, shut this ugly woman up. A hand reached out to snatch her wrist. Naya shrieked and punched the rogue with all of her might.